In our previous lesson, we tackled respiratory system. Now let us discuss cardiovascular system and how this organ system aid in respiration. For the discussion proper, let us read today's instructional objective. At the end of the activity with at least 80% proficiency, you should be able to first identify the parts and the functions of the cardiovascular system. Second, explain the relationship of cardiovascular system with the respiratory system. So what is a cardiovascular system or circulatory system? Cardiovascular system is an organ system responsible for carrying oxygen, nutrients, and hormones all over the body. So we can get oxygen by breathing in air. So the air will then travel to the different pathways of the respiratory system until it reaches the structure known as the alveoli. Oxygen will then penetrate the alveoli membrane to the bloodstream through the process known as diffusion. On the other hand, when we say nutrients, we can get nutrients by eating food or from the food that we eat. So we consider food as a package of nutrients. So the food will then travel from the mouth, esophagus, stomach until it reaches the small intestine. The small intestine is highly covered with this finger-like projectile known as villi. At the center of the villi is known as the lactile, and the lactile encompasses this lymphatic vessel or blood vessel which is responsible for absorbing the simplest form of nutrients. The cardiovascular system is also responsible for carrying waste material out of the body, primarily the waste material from our kidney known as the urine, uric acid, and creatinine. So when we say urine, it is actually an organic compound which actually breaks down amino acid. And when we say amino acid, this is the primary monoblocks of protein. So when we say protein, it is actually the nutrients which helps in fixing damaged tissue and muscle as we do heavy works. Now on the other hand, when we say uric acid, it is the byproduct of purines. So we can actually get purines from drinking alcoholic beverage, by consuming meat and fish. On the other hand, when we say creatinine, it is actually the byproduct of creatine. So, cardiovascular system is also responsible for carrying antibodies or the white blood cell which fight the harmful substance invading our body. Also, cardiovascular system have three major parts. We have the heart, the blood vessels, and also the blood. So we will discuss this one by one. The first organ of the cardiovascular system is known as the heart. So the heart is a muscular organ which pumps the blood through the blood vessel. So we have four chambers of the heart. We have the right and left atrium and right and left ventricle. So when we say atrium, it is the receiving chamber of the heart. So it serves as the upper chamber of the heart. On the other hand, when we say ventricle, this is the bottom chamber of the heart. It also pumps out blood or expel blood through the blood vessel. We have here an illustration of a human heart. In our previous slide, we said that the heart have four chambers. We have the right and left atrium and right and left ventricle. Let's start with the upper chamber. So what's the difference between atrium and atria? When we say atrium, it refers to a singular term, or it only refers to a single upper chamber. For example, we have the right atrium. When we say atria, it refers to right atrium and left atrium. It is a plural term. What's the difference between right and left atrium? Right atrium is the receiving chamber of the oxygenated blood coming from the vena cava. When we say deoxygenated blood, these are blood cells which lacks of oxygen. When we say vena cava, these are the veins connected to the different region of the body. We have two types of vena cava. We have anterior or superior vena cava, which is connected to the upper region of the body. And we have inferior or posterior vena cava, which is connected to the lower region of the body. Moving forward, the left atrium is the receiving chamber for oxygenated blood or oxygen-rich blood coming from the lungs through this channel known as the pulmonary vein. Now let's discuss the ventricles. So as you can observe, the left and right ventricles differs in terms of the thickness of their walls. Now, the wall of the right ventricle is much thinner than the left ventricle. This is because the right ventricle pump or expel the oxygenated blood only to the lungs. On the other hand, the left ventricle is responsible for pumping or expelling oxygenated blood to the different body region. Lastly, you can observe a tissue which divides the heart into two parts. We have the right and left parts. This tissue is known as the septum. So inside the heart is a tissue known as the valve. So the valve prevents blood backflow. So also it keeps the blood flowing in proper direction. So we have four valves inside our heart. To easily recall the four types of valve, you must remember the abbreviation TPVA, wherein T stands for tricuspid valve, P stands for pulmonary valve, B stands for bicuspid valve, and A stands for aortic valve. The first valve that you will encounter inside the human heart is the tricuspid valve. So the tricuspid valve prevents blood backflow from the right ventricle to the right atrium. The second valve is known as the pulmonary semilunar valve or pulmonary valve, which prevents blood from flowing back from the pulmonary artery to the right ventricle. Moving forward, we have the mitral valve or bicuspid valve, which prevents blood backflow from the left ventricle to the left atrium. Lastly, we have the aortic semilunar valve or aortic valve, which prevents blood backflow from aorta to the left ventricle. Kindly observe how the different chambers of the heart contract synchronously as it pumps the oxygenated blood and oxygenated blood to its proper channel. I have here an illustration of a heart. Now, I want you to identify the four chambers of the heart as I point them. What do you call this chamber? This chamber is known as the right atrium. Now, what about this chamber? This lower chamber is called the right ventricle. Moving forward, we have this chamber, which is known as the left ventricle. Lastly, what do you call this chamber? We have the left atrium. Now, let's identify the four types of valves that can be seen inside our heart. What do you call this valve which separate the left atrium and left ventricle? This is called bicuspid or mitral valve. How about this valve which separate the pulmonary artery and the right ventricle? This is called pulmonary semilunar valve or pulmonary artery. What about this valve which separate the right atrium from the right ventricle? This is called the tricuspid valve. Lastly, we have this valve which separate the aorta from the left ventricle. This is called aortic semilunar valve or aortic valve. Now let's name the different vessels. What do you call this artery? This artery is called aorta. What about this artery? It is connected to the lungs and transport the oxygenated blood to the lungs. We have pulmonary artery. What about this vessel, which is connected to the upper region of the body. So this vein is called superior or anterior vena cava. Lastly, we have this vein, which is connected to the lower region of the body. This is called inferior or posterior vena cava. Okay, job well done. Now let's proceed with the next lesson. So the second part of the cardiovascular system is known as the blood vessel. So the blood vessel is responsible for carrying blood through the tissues and organs. Now we have three types of blood vessels. We have the artery, the vein, and capillary. So when we say artery, it carries blood away from the heart. So always remember that artery starts with the initial letter A as well as away. So they start with A. So artery, away. So on the other hand, when we say vein, it is a blood vessel responsible for returning blood back to the heart. So we have vein and back. Lastly, we have the capillary. When we say capillary, it is the smallest type of blood vessel. So it is also responsible for molecules exchange and absorption. So we have here pictures of different types of blood vessel. We have the artery, the vein, and the capillary. So among the blood vessels, as you can see, the artery is the biggest type of blood vessel. It is actually made up of connective tissue, smooth muscle, and epithelium cell. The vein is thinner than the artery, and the capillary is only made up of single layer of epithelium cell. The third part of the cardiovascular system is known as the blood. The blood is also known as the river of life and fluid tissue. The blood is responsible for transportation, protection, stabilization of temperature, and regulation of pH level. Now, it is responsible for transportation in the sense that the blood cell is responsible for transporting enzymes, hormones, nutrients, and other essential elements to the different regions of the body. It is also responsible in terms of protecting the body from invading pathogenic agents or foreign bodies through the help of the white blood cell. So we have these two cell mechanism known as the phagocytosis and pinocytosis. So when we say phagocytosis, it is the process in which cell engulf or eat foreign bodies. On the other hand, when we say pinocytosis, it is a process when cell drink foreign debris or substance. So also always remember that the normal pH of the blood is 7.35 to 7.45. So the blood is slightly basic. So the blood is also a combination of plasma and cell fragments and blood cell. So we will discuss this one by one. So as we said, the blood has two cellular components. The first one is the blood plasma. The second one is the blood cell and cell fragments. So let's discuss the blood plasma. So when we say blood plasma, it is a pale yellowish liquid. It primarily composed of water, enzymes, salts, and other nutrients. Now the function of the blood plasma is to carry these nutrients, carry these essential materials to the different regions of the body. The blood plasma makes up 55% of the blood. Let's go now with the blood cell and cell fragments. So we have three types of cellular components. The first one is the red blood cell, the second one is the white blood cell, and the third one is the platelets. So let's discuss the red blood cell. So when we say red blood cell, it is also known as erythrocyte. Erythro means red, cyte means cell. So it has a biconcave shape. When we say biconcave, it is flat and has a shallow center. So as you can see, red blood cell has a shallow center to make room for more hemoglobin. So hemoglobin helps in carrying oxygen as well as carbon dioxide. So red blood cell is produced by bone marrow, and it has 120 days life expectation. So when the red blood cell is worn out, it can be destroyed in the liver or spleen. So we have here a picture of the red blood cell. It has flat surface and a shallow center. So now, because of this simple and also flexible form of the red blood cell, it can fold up as it moves to the narrowest blood vessel, which is known as the capillary. So next one is the white blood cell. So white blood cell is also known as leukocytes. So when we say leuko, it means white. When we say cyte, it means cell. So in terms of shape, white blood cell is irregular in terms of shape because we have variety of white blood cell depending on the pathogenic agent that our body conceive. So white blood cell is also produced in the bone marrow and they develop or mature in the lymph node. Actually, the white blood cell is an important part of the immune system. White blood cell fight and track infectious agents such as bacteria, viruses, and germs that may invade the body. So what are the types of blood vessel? The first one is known as the lymphocyte. So when we say lymphocyte, it is active against pathogens, viruses, and also tumor cell. So the second one is known as the monocyte. When we say monocyte, it phagocytize pathogen. So when we say phagocytize or phagocytosis, it means the mechanism of the cell in which the cell engulf or eat pathogens. When we say pathogens, it is disease-causing agents. So when we say macrophages, this is the mature stage of monocyte. Macrophages also activate lymphocyte. Eosinophil together with the basophil is active against allergic reaction. Also, eosinophil phagocytize parasite. So when we say parasite, these are organisms that cannot live without an actual host. For example, we have the ascaris or the roundworm that can be found in our intestine. Next is the neutrophil, which is active against microorganisms. So when we say microorganisms, these are organisms that cannot be seen by our naked eye. So they can be only seen through the use of electron microscope or compound light microscope. For example, we have Streptococcus pneumoniae, which causes pneumonia. Next is the basophil, which excrete heparin and also active against allergic reaction. As you can observe, white blood cells do not only differ in terms of function, but they also differ in terms of their shape and structure. This is a white blood cell engulfing or eating a bacteria. Again, this process is known as phagocytosis. So lastly, we have the platelets. So when we say platelets, they are also known as thrombocyte. So platelets are actually not true cell. So they actually came from the fragments of cytoplasm of the megakaryocyte. When we say megakaryocyte, this is the bone marrow cell. So megakaryocytes actually have lobated nucleus, meaning to say they have tongue-shaped nucleus. Also, the main function of the platelet is for blood clotting. So, they prevent excessive bleeding when a blood vessel is injured. So, I have here a damaged blood vessel. So, now, fibrinogen, a protein in the plasma, produces fibrin. So, this fibrin will then elongate and trap platelets. So, these platelets will seal the damaged tissue. And then, as it heals, it will harden and transform into a scab. Moving forward, let's discuss the two types of circulation. Now we have the first type, which is the pulmonary circulation. So the pulmonary circulation transports the oxygenated blood from the heart to the lungs. So when we say deoxygenated, these are blood cells which lacks of oxygen. The second one is known as the systemic circulation. So the systemic circulation transports oxygenated blood from the heart to all body tissue. When we say oxygenated blood, it means rich oxygen blood. Let's discuss the first type of circulation known as the pulmonary circulation. Pulmonary circulation starts at a chamber known as the right ventricle. The right ventricle will then contract and transfer the deoxygenated blood to the vessel known as the pulmonary artery. The pulmonary artery will serve as the channel for the deoxygenated blood from the right ventricle to the capillary in the lungs. The lungs have this structure known as the alveoli, which is responsible for gas exchange, turning the deoxygenated blood to oxygenated blood. The oxygenated blood will then travel to a vessel known as the pulmonary veins. This vessel will transport oxygenated blood back to the heart, to the chamber known as the left atrium, which serves as the receiving chamber of oxygenated blood. The left atrium will then contract and pump blood to the left ventricle. So let's discuss pulmonary circulation, but this time we will be using an illustration. So as we said, pulmonary circulation starts with the right ventricle. So again, when we say ventricle, this is the chamber which expels blood to the lungs or to the different regions of the body. So now, the right ventricle will then pump deoxygenated blood to this vessel. When we say deoxygenated, again, these are blood cells which lacks of oxygen. Now, it will pump deoxygenated blood to this vessel. This vessel is known as pulmonary artery. So, why pulmonary artery? So, this vessel is connected to the lungs. So, it is known as pulmonary. And this vessel pumps blood away from the heart. So, meaning to say, this vessel represents artery. So, in totality, it is known as the pulmonary artery. Now, the oxygenated blood will then pass through this vessel and will reach the lungs. So the lungs is the site of respiration, primarily, specifically rather, the alveoli, which is the main site of respiration. Deoxygenated blood will then turn into oxygenated blood. When we say oxygenated blood, oxygen-rich blood, and will then travel through this vessel known as the pulmonary vein. Why pulmonary? Because it is connected to the lungs and it transports blood back to the heart. Therefore, it is known as vein. So we have pulmonary vein. So this chamber, the left atrium, will act as the receiving chamber of oxygenated blood. It will then contract and pump oxygenated blood in this chamber known as the left ventricle. The left ventricle will then pump and expel blood to the different regions of the body. So this is the pulmonary circulation. So it primarily focuses on the circulation that occurs within the heart to the lungs. Let's discuss the second type of circulation known as the systemic circulation. Systemic circulation is actually a continuation of the pulmonary circulation. Right after the left ventricle pump out or expel oxygenated blood, it will then travel, the blood will then travel through a vessel known as aorta. Oxygenated blood will then travel to the different blood vessels of the head, the chest, arms, abdominal region, and the legs. So as we know, this part is actually made up of various types of cell, and these various type of cell made use of the oxygen that the blood cell carry. So as a byproduct, carbon dioxide is released. Carbon dioxide in a form of ion is being carried by the blood cell back to the heart through a vessel known as superior and inferior vena cava. So now, the right atrium will serve as the receiving chamber which received the deoxygenated blood. So let's further understand systemic circulation by using this illustration once again. So the left ventricle will pump or expel oxygenated blood through a vessel known as the aorta. The aorta is connected to the different blood vessels of the upper and the lower region of the body. Of course, the upper part and the lower portion of the body is actually made up of various types of cells, and each cell in our body make use of the oxygen that the blood cell deliver in order to break down nutrients, starch, and sugar in order to create ATP or adenosine triphosphate, which is the primary source of energy in our body. So as a byproduct, carbon dioxide is being released, and carbon dioxide in a form of bicarbonate ion is being carried by the blood cell back to the heart through a vessel known as vena cava. So we have two types of vena cava. We have anterior or superior vena cava, which is connected to the upper region of the body, and we have the posterior or inferior vena cava, which is connected to the lower portion of the body. So this vena cava helps in delivering the oxygenated blood back to the right atrium, which is the receiving chamber of the deoxygenated blood. So thank you for listening, grade 9. I hope that you learned a lot for today's discussion. So just a little reminder, if you have any inquiries or questions, do not hesitate, miss. But it should be on your scheduled time. Always follow the schedule and your consultation period. So have a good day ahead and enjoy your day.